Hey everyone, welcome to another edition of the Dan and Joe Super Show. As always, I'm Dan.
And I'm Joe.
Well, Joe, before the season started, I'd flip flop between who I'd picked for national champion. I was a little bit more certain about my one, a little bit off the wall pick, who's turning out to be really good, and that was Florida State. I had Florida State winning the national championship, and that one looks good right now. Now, my second pick, and I looked at this, I did this one based on the way it played last year and kind of the history of the program, looks to be quite bad right now. And I think you can all but say that I was wrong on it, and that was Tennessee. Uh, Joe, they just had, I think, the worst loss that Tennessee football has had, maybe the entire Josh Heupel era. There have been a lot of hype with Heupel. It's a great season last year. I still think that they deserved to be looked at, for a college football playoff berth. People were talking about Alabama deserving to get in. I thought Tennessee was definitely worthy to get in. I thought that Hendon Hooker should have been invited to the Heisman Trophy ceremony. But they had a great season. And this year, I mean, Joe Milton is one of the most physically gifted quarterbacks we've ever seen. A lot of people talked about his inconsistency and the fact that while he has been a starting quarterback at three different schools, he's also been benched at three different schools. And he's been starting quarterback at three different schools. That's usually not a good thing. They went into Florida where Billy Napier's team had looked truly pathetic for this season. I mean, they were terrible, awfully coached against Utah. Not that Utah was a bad team, but Utah, of course, was without their starting quarterback in Cam Rising, who's an excellent player and is a big deal for Utah and really is a big factor in where they can go this year. He didn't play in this game. And they got beat resoundingly at Utah by their backup quarterbacks kind of sharing roles in that game and in a very disjointed manner. And, you had the issue with the two number threes on the field, a lot of player clock management and play calls by Billy Napier. And with the nature of the Florida fan base, which is they're a very aggressive, entitled, angry fan base, it was starting to look bad for them. Tennessee had lost 20, it was 19 consecutive years, no, 20 consecutive years at Florida. The last time they had won down the swamp was back in 2003. And Joe, if they didn't win this game, they were going to approach the Auburn and Baton Rouge issues, where Auburn hadn't won at LSU from 1999 all the way to 2001 when Bo Nix has a magical game and you got the W for them. So this was a lot of stakes on this game. Tennessee was looking to be a clearly much better football team, had a great defense. The offense hadn't really clicked the way you thought, and there were some signs that maybe this wouldn't go that way. And Raymond Florida plays an excellent game, just jumps all over Tennessee, gets up, I believe, 24-6, 27-6 in the first half, and Florida ends up winning the game convincingly.
Yeah, I mean, the way I appraise it, building off of what you said, I look at it for Florida. I'm just stunned that they were able to win the game at all, but especially the way they won it, like by that fashion. I think that the Billy Napier tenure is kind of quickly becoming one of the more puzzling up and down coaching tenures we've ever seen the last few years. I mean, it's got to be frustrating to the Florida fans where this is kind of like that Utah win last year. You have an exciting win, a surprising win. You think that's going to galvanize you, but who knows, with the way they looked the first couple of weeks of the season. You got that Jekyll and Hyde nature. And then on the flip side, I think that this was kind of a potential regression for Tennessee as a program, losing a game like this against a big rival. I think this is a game they needed to win the way Florida looked earlier in the season. And you kind of just have some demons that are still out there if you're Tennessee in the swamp.
Yeah, Joe, I thought this was a really important game for Heupel to really announce for real that Tennessee's back. Not that we had a great season, but that we're going to continue to have great seasons. And you need to beat your rival, one of your main rivals, to do it. And last year, their win over Florida was such a big deal because they had a big losing streak against Florida. And I thought that was a real jump starter to their season last year. And this is one that they needed. The SEC was down, SEC East and the SEC West, really outside of Georgia, has looked pretty poor this year. And so this would have been a great way to establish yourself as the second best team in the East and one that maybe has the best chance at Georgia, with Georgia coming up to play them up the Rocky Top, which is such a difficult place to play. And Joe just came out flat. Joe Milton didn't look very sharp. I don't think the game plan was very good. I mean, they're not giving him a lot of chances to throw it down the field. And the weirdest thing to me was that Tennessee couldn't run the football. They looked so good, like they had two of the better running backs and Reggie Small, and to the ability to run, they had solid backfield right there. And I thought that was going to help Joe Milton out a lot because usually run game and defense travels. Unfortunately for Tennessee, they looked good in the run game and defense, and neither one of them traveled to Florida. And they got beat on both sides of the line of scrimmage. They looked like the less physical team, and they really just got beat up and down by what I thought before this game was a poor Florida team.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I think that you felt like Tennessee coming into the season would have a chance to beat Georgia, especially the way Georgia, looked against South Carolina, in the earlier game. You thought, who knows? I still, expected Georgia to win the East, but felt like, Tennessee had a shot. And now, this makes you think that they're far from it, obviously, right now. And I think that I was also disappointed overall because Joe Milton, for me, was a fascinating player coming into the season because he kind of represented something that's a lost art in college football, where you kind of get to see a guy that is set, as the backup on the sidelines for a year or two, and then takes over for a successful starter. And nowadays, we just have transfers coming in like free agents. So I thought it was really cool to see Milton kind of be as the next man up. And so I hate that it hasn't worked out as well so far.
And me too. I was really excited about him. I looked at him a lot as like T. Martin. That was my parallel. Hendon Hooker was like Peyton Manning, the guy who almost won the Heisman Trophy, who had incredible numbers and really got the excitement and the fan base going. But the next season, they won the national championship with T. Martin, who sat on the bench behind Peyton for, I think, 3 years and didn't start till he was a senior. And then he had the season where they won the national championship. That's kind of what I saw out of Joe Milton this year. And now, I mean, they got like the smallest chance ever to still have that on the horizon. And this was a really painful loss for him. But on the flip side, an excellent win for Billy Napier. And now I think the Brewers and the hangman's noose is being hung up a little bit, and he can get up and he can do his job. And I didn't necessarily believe he would get fired this season, but I did think the heat would be turned up a lot. And now I think if you're him, if you can go out and you can win 7 or 8 games, you have I think the number 3 recruiting class in America this year, maybe you have the chance to build momentum. I'm not saying that he can do that, but interestingly enough, Urban Meyer referenced it. And if you watch the Swamp Kings documentary they have on Netflix that goes into the Florida dynasty from 2005 to 2009, or the 2010, the years that Urban Meyer were there, he had a game like this. I think it was in his second season, where it was basically said, if you don't win this game, you're going to get fired. Now, I want to say it was even actually against Florida down in the Swamp. Or it might have been against Florida at home, and he was able to get the win against Steve Spurrier. And it was against South Carolina. That's what it was. It was the first time that South Carolina was coaching at the Swamp as the South Carolina coach. And basically, it was like, if you don't win this game, we lose to Steve Spurrier, we're going to get rid of you. And he was able to do it. He was able to win that game. And then, they finished that season somewhere in the 8-4 type range. Next year, win the national championship and win the national championship 2 out of the next 3 years. And so Urban Meyer put it out there like, hey, it almost happened to me, and then I was able to turn it around. I don't necessarily believe that Billy Napier is, going to be the next Urban Meyer, because even when Urban Meyer went to Florida, I knew that he had that capability based on what he did at Utah and Bowling Green.
Yeah, I mean, the other example a lot of people use is Mike Norvell. They'll want Florida to be patient with Billy Napier to see what he can build, in the next 3 or 4 years. I think that I'll say this. I still have that, degree of skepticism because he's been inconsistent so far, with maybe a big win followed, by some humbling losses. But I'll say this, if he gets it going, this is probably definitely a moment to look back at, as something that kind of got it started.
Absolutely. That's where I'm at with it. I'm not saying that it is the turning moment, But it's a moment that for right now is keeping the hangman at bay. And if he does turn things around, this is definitely a watershed moment where things moved up for the positive for him.
Yes, definitely.
All right, Joe. Speaking of things moving up to the positive, Colorado just keeps on having, week after week to the center of the college football universe. And last week, of course, you had no relation to Mike Norvell, but Coach Norvell of Colorado State just adding even more heat to the fire by telling Deion Sanders and saying on TV, calling him out, saying, I'm an adult, and when I talk to other adults, I take my hat and my sunglasses off. And of course, that caused, just controversy everywhere. Everyone, including myself, was just banking on the fact that in what is a good rivalry that's not talked about very much between Colorado and Colorado State, that Deion was just going to kill him, that it was going to be just a beatdown. And Joe, I kind of think when I was watching that game and Colorado State had the lead and, almost won, that maybe that was a calculated move by Norvell to talk trash about Deion and get his players maybe trying to play too hard, because you kind of saw that Colorado was making uncanny mistakes and pressing a little bit. And as devious as it was, maybe that was a Machiavellian move by Coach Norvell to get this Colorado group to play a little haphazard and with too much emotion.
No, it certainly could be that case. I have a couple of theories. I think, that there's no doubt that he uses as a motivational tactic. Also, would love to. I never pulled up like the context of that interview. I've seen interviews though before where reporters will kind of, almost beg a coach or a player to kind of make a critical point about somebody, like, where they might say something, for instance, hypothetically, oh, what do you think about Deion? And then he kind of tries to avoid it. And it's like, no, what do you really think about Deion? Just kind of bait him to say something. So I'd be interested to see the context. But at the end of the day, though, let's face it, this is an entertainment business. It's college athletics, but, it's really entertainment when it comes down to it. And so I've always been kind of conspiracy theorist to the degree that I feel like there's somebody in the powers that be, NCAA, the TV markets, whoever, that loves to encourage stories like this, quotes like this that make the headlines. It's like we'll talk about, in the next segment, Lane Kiffin a couple of years ago, get your popcorn ready. Like, I think a lot of that is scripted and orchestrated. And so, but regardless of what it is, it was set up, and it led to just an outstanding, exciting game that has kind of continued this wave of Colorado craziness.
Joe, what an unbelievable game. And for me to be able to stay awake till 2 in the morning all the time to watch the end of it, it had to be an incredible game. Now, in all honesty, I fell asleep a couple times. My wife kept waking me up because I wanted to see the ending to it. And what an ending it was. Colorado's down by 11 points with, 5 minutes left to go. They kicked the field goal. And then interesting decision here by Norvell with how aggressive he had been, with him calling out Deion, with him obviously having his guys very well prepared to play in a game of this level of magnitude and emotion. He has a 4th and 2 opportunity when he's winning the game by 8 points. And he's on Colorado's 40-yard line, which is a very natural place to go for it. But while his defense had played, okay, they'd still been shredded to an extent by Shedeur Sanders and that high-flying Colorado offense. He chooses to punt it instead of going for it. And I kind of thought that when that happened, I was like, well, you just lost the game, because that was his chance to win it. And I thought the way the offense was moving the ball, I thought he had a greater than 75% chance of picking up that first down.
Yeah, I think you've got to do it right there. This Colorado defense that doesn't have as much depth. They're going to get tired easily, the way you're moving the football. And if you're going to win a game like this, in that environment, you had to be, willing to take some chances.
Absolutely. I had the same criticism of Brian Harsin in the 2021 Iron Bowl. He had a chance to go for one on 4th down and win the game against Alabama, and he chose to punt it. And when you're playing a team that's more talented than you are, and you have a chance to win the game right there, you play to win. You don't play not to lose.
Oh, no doubt.
And so, of course, Shedeur brings them 98 yards down the field. They score, they get the 2-point conversion, and it goes into overtime, and they ultimately win. And the sad part about it is it was an excellent game. The build up to it, incredible. You got the raucous, the game day host. You got Little Wayne on the big noon kickoff and rapping, leading the team out on the field, which I've never seen that before. And the big takeaway is the dirty hit by Blackburn on Travis Hunter, which that sadly is probably ended his Heisman Trophy campaign.
Yeah, it does put a damper on that. I really, really hate to see that. It was just awesome. Like what he was doing is kind of like, like the football version of Shohei Ohtani and Babe Ruth. And I loved it, but hopefully at some point he can, be back. But, I love the fact that, this Colorado, influx of, energy has kind of continued at least another week. And I think, great atmosphere. And I saw a stat this week that Colorado had, I think, the lowest, and I couldn't believe this, the lowest projected win total in the FBS at like 2.7 coming into the season. They've already surpassed that. But quite frankly, with Dion and company and all the transfers in Sanders, like I honestly, I can't believe that was actually the projection.
I remember seeing that, and I thought that a very good bet would have been to take them the over on the win total because I kept seeing that at 2.5, and I was like, "There's no way that Dion's going to go out there and win 2 games."
Yeah, there's got to be worse programs out there. Worse programs.
Oh, definitely. I mean, like Rutgers. Yeah, 3 though, ironically. Yeah, I thought that was kind of crazy too, and I thought that was a great futures bet just to take the over on the win total for Colorado. Coach Prime, I thought that he handled the whole dirty hit on Travis Hunter very well. It's kind of terrible. I mean, I know people love football when they start caring about like Travis Hunter, but apparently people found this Blackburn player for Colorado State's like address and his parents' address and his phone number, and they fixed it all on the internet. And the guy's received like hundreds of death threats, and his family has too. And I mean, it's just crazy. I mean, it was a dirty hit. Don't get me wrong, but I've seen a lot worse hits than that, including in the college football playoff semifinal with Georgia and Ohio State last year that wasn't even flagged. I mean, it wasn't one that would rank in the top 10 most dirty hits I've ever seen. And I thought that Dion handled that very professionally when he was, he put it out there instead of Travis Hunter. They were like, listen, I mean, this is football. This happens. I'm not condoning it, but I don't. If you're a Colorado fan, you're putting that kind of stuff out there. We don't want you. That's terrible. Don't be doing that about another player and causing that kind of issue.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you got to make a statement like that, to stop, curtail that criticism because, the way it is now with modern technology, you can literally have people, in the stadium during the game, sending these just ridiculous messages out there. So you've definitely got to stop that.
Absolutely. Joe, speaking of things we need to stop buying into the fact that the Mississippi State was going to have a legit football team this year. I never believed it to begin the season. There was a lot of people talking about, well, we got so many players coming back. And, Zach Arnett has performed so well as a coach in the interim position. And I thought he did handle the bowl game very good last year. I thought that was the right decision by Mississippi State. But ultimately, Joe, you and I talked about this. The complete change in offensive philosophy was going to come back and bite them. And, they hadn't looked overly impressive in their first couple of weeks. They're not utilizing their best player in Will Rogers, and they faced a mad LSU team who right now, I mean, you compare their performance versus Georgia's performance, LSU was like the best team in the SEC on Saturday.
They really did. It was building off of the narrative that you and I had predicted last weekend, where you kind of see LSU rise back up to the top of the SEC West perception. And you see Mississippi State, just the issues that we've seen with their offense, with Arnett, kind of, in my opinion, defiantly changing up their offense despite the personnel that they have. That's kind of, allowed them to go from a team that should on paper be, one of the most experienced teams in the SEC, if not the most experienced teams. And this should be a year where Rogers, is a 4th-year starter, where they're actually making some noise, and it's kind of prevented that from ever starting.
Yeah, and I think that I know you got philosophies, and obviously Arnett's been a very successful defensive coordinator, and he wanted to get a complementary offensive coordinator. He wanted to have an offense that made his defense easier to perform and not stress as much. But you gotta look at who your skill players are, and you gotta tailor an offense around it. And Bay was the wrong offensive coordinator hire based on the fact that you got Will Rogers for at least the end of this season. I think you could have him for a whole another season. And he's one of the best quarterbacks in the SEC. And you have that. You need to use that. And guess what? If you think you're planning on being there for a while, maybe 2 years down the line, you can go ahead and get a different offensive coordinator. But you should have planned for the now. And the bottom line is, when everyone's thinking about what happened with Mike Leach, it is important that you have a solid season. You didn't have to have a great season, but you needed to at least go out and win 6 or 7 games. And I'm worried about their ability to do that right now, Joe.
Yeah, I have a lot of concerns. And the other thing I'll say about it, the parallel for me is, the opposite of what State should have done. Like, I think about, like, in the NFL, the year after the Rams won the Super Bowl with Kurt Warner, Dick Vermeil retired the first time, and they, still ran the same offense. I think they actually promoted the offensive coordinator, Michael Martz, to the head coaching role. And it's not like they changed, their offensive scheme. They're running still the greatest show on turf, still had a lot of success in the next couple of seasons. And to me, it would have been like them going to like a run-oriented offense that would have made no sense with the personnel they had. And I think that State should have, taken a page out of that playbook. And like you said, brought in a coordinator that could fit this offense. And then maybe a couple of years down the road, Arnett could install his system.
Yeah, and it's no coincidence that you lost people like Ronald Wilson to Georgia and all these great receivers that knew that they were about to be not featured anymore. Guess what? If you had made that promise to him that I'm going to stick with this style of offense and you're going to keep getting fed the rock by Will Rogers, maybe they wouldn't transfer.
Mm-hmm. Right, but I'm going to be fascinated next year to see where Will Rogers ends up.
Yeah, me too, because I think he's going to transfer at the end of the season, and if not, that'd be a mistake.
Definitely, and I think it would be highly sought after too.
Oh, he's going to be big time in the transfer market. Sure, he might be just moving about 60 miles east over to Tuscaloosa, which, speaking of Alabama right now, I mean, it would be worse to describe how terrible that performance was against South Florida last week. It's sad we went last week on the show as someone that's a huge Auburn fan and a big Ole Miss fan and, doesn't like Alabama, but is a historian and has watched Nick Saban for so many years. And I just thought that they would go out and kill South Florida. I mean, Joe, 70-7 wouldn't have shocked me. Something in that range. I thought they were going to put all of their anger, all of their frustration, and all their focus that they had lacked into that game and play an excellent football game. Instead, we saw maybe the worst offensive showing in the entire Nick Saban era against a substandard Group of 5 football team. And the thing that really shocked me about it to begin with was why he benched Jalen Milroe. I know that he wasn't excellent against Texas, but he wasn't bad, and he certainly wasn't the reason they lost that game.
No, I mean, he, to me, gives them obviously the best chance to win with everything that he can do, with his ability to improvise and create plays when it breaks down. And, there were some conspiracies about whether or not he was suspended last week. I don't know. I felt like it definitely impacted the team. I felt like the morale of the team, they just weren't playing as hard. But regardless, I mean, that's still no excuse. I mean, they let a very average South Florida team hang in that game, way too long. It was a very kind of partisan Alabama crowd in the stands. It's not like, it was a raucous environment. Quite frankly, kind of a weird, road trip for Alabama to go, on the road like that. But at the end of the day, I kind of came away thinking that the way this played out, I'm really kind of surprised that Alabama was even favored heading into this weekend.
Yeah, I'm surprised they're favored in that game too. I mean, after everything that happened, I mean, that just shows the cachet that Nick Saban has had and the struggles, frankly, that Lane Kiffin has had against Saban. I think those all feed into Alabama being favored. We'll talk more about that in our next episode. But you look at the numbers, I think Tyler Buchner went 5 of 14. He was the one who got the start. Who, that's Tommy Reese's boy. He brought him down with him from Notre Dame. And then, Ty Simpson didn't have much of a better showing. I think he ended up like 5 of 9. and none of them got a touchdown. I think it was all rushing touchdowns, and they win 17-3. And you can say a win is a win, and it is. But when you're coming off a game like Texas, where you really needed to have a get-right game, especially in advance of a big game against Ole Miss, this is a game that causes a lot more questions than it does answers.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And a lot of question marks. And one kind of common denominator that I'd be interested to get your thoughts on. I was thinking about it with this year's college football season through, 3 weeks. I feel like a lot of the most talented teams out there all have something fascinating in common. They've all, for the most part, got an impactful transfer quarterback at the helm. Whereas you see Alabama, you see Clemson, they're a lot of times going out there with an in-house quarterback or maybe an underwhelming transfer in the case of Alabama here. And so I can't help but wonder if that's causing part of the problem here. And then also you just not seeing Alabama use the transfer portal enough for this specific team to fill some of their gaps.
But I mean, you have to think that Joe Milroe has been there. I think this is his third year that he's been in Tuscaloosa. You got to see him in limited starts last year against Arkansas and A&M. You can see the inconsistencies there. And you knew Ty Simpson was young and inexperienced. And you would have thought that Nick Saban would have hit the ground running to get a better transfer quarterback, especially when, I mean, there's no shortage of excellent transfer quarterbacks out there. Sam Hartman, Levy, not Levy, Leary over at Kentucky. You had Spencer Sanders available. I mean, a lot of good transfer quarterbacks that were out there for the taking going into the season. I mean, shoot, Peyton Thorne looks better than Milroe or Buchner at this point, and Saban didn't get any of them. I think Ole Miss right now has 3 guys that could start for Alabama.
And I never felt like they were in the running for any of them either. Like it wasn't even considered almost.
Yeah, it was strange. And so it's a weird situation right here. I'm not ready to be here and be the guys. Oh, the dynasty's dead. Saban's going to retire at the end of the season. But I will say this, and we'll tease this a lot more in the next episode. This will be a story that'll get out of control if they don't win on Saturday.
It could. It really could.
Joe, speaking of transfer quarterbacks, I mentioned Peyton Thorne. For Auburn, I don't want to say a whole lot about this game because we're playing Sanford. But yet again, I found Peyton Thorne to be underwhelming. He played a little bit better. He showed some mobility with his legs I didn't know he had. But he still threw 2 really puzzling interceptions, one of which he threw like into quadruple coverage in the end zone. In fact, both of his interceptions were in the end zone. And I'm going to need to see a lot from him this week. And he needs to have a lot of improvement because so far I've been highly disappointed in him.
Yeah, I mean that's been kind of the one unfortunate thing for Auburn's start. You're undefeated, but you haven't seen the quarterback play that you expected. And I have not seen Hugh Freeze's imprint enough on this offense like I would have expected early on. Like I know it's still early, still plenty of time, to get some of these, cobwebs shaken off and get a better rhythm. But you would expect to have, a quarterback throwing at least for 200 yards a game under Hugh Freeze.
Absolutely. And I was also expecting the running game to be better. I mean, this is looking more like the running game that he had at Ole Miss, which was not very good. And he has an incredible stable of backs with Jarquez Hunter, Damari Alston, Jeremiah Cobb, and Brian Batty. And none of them got over 40 yards in that game last week.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Joe, we've had a lot of interesting games that happened last week. Arkansas was one that kind of fascinated me. They got out to a 14-0 lead against BYU. BYU had been a team that had not been very impressive this year, especially on the offensive side of the ball. And yet BYU comes back and wins a huge game on the road. And I think a really devastating loss for Arkansas, who was a team that a lot of people had as a dark horse SEC West team based on them probably having the best combo of quarterback and starting running back with KJ Jefferson and Rocket Sanders. And I know they didn't have Rocket Sanders last week. That was a really disappointing loss, especially considering they wiped the floor with BYU last year.
Yeah, I mean, very, disappointing loss for them. I think that similar to Mississippi State. You would think, with an experienced quarterback, great running back, this would be your year in kind of an up and down SEC West for the most part, where you might be competitive. But if you're out there losing to BYU, I think a lot of Arkansas fans are questioning how many SEC wins are they actually going to get this year.
Oh, definitely. Joe, we had 2 players of the week in the SEC last week. Actually 3 of them. I think 2 of them are the same team. But I did want to mention, going back to the LSU game very briefly, what a game by Malik Neighbors, right? I think he had 21 catches for over 200 yards and 3 touchdowns. Just excellent numbers on his part. Okay. So he was 13 catches on 13 passes, and he had 239 yards, which was the 4th most in LSU history, and he caught every pass that was thrown to him. I think Neighbors almost secured himself a first-round draft pick spot against Mississippi State last week.
Yeah, I mean, he just kind of continued that long line of receivers at LSU over the last few years.
That's right. And Joe, another receiver that really showed out, he's someone that we knew had a lot of talent. Maybe he didn't have enough talent around him last year to show out. He was someone that I thought probably was going to hit the transfer portal, but good on Eli Drinkowitz for holding on to him. Luther Burden looked amazing against Kansas State. Huge win for, Eli Drinkowitz, especially the way it happened. But Luther Burden showed his size, his physicality, had over 100 yards receiving. And more impressive than the one where he went up and got a 50-50 ball to get a touchdown was the one where they threw that out route to him. He just ran past everybody and bulldozed his way into the end zone. I mean, he looked like an Alabama receiver back in the day when they kind of did that play. And Luther Burden is an impressive wide receiver.
Yeah, really good. You think about, was it Dorial Green Beckham, who was there about 9 or 10 years ago, was really solid. But yeah, I think that Missouri has been obviously the best story in the SEC East. They've kind of been that surprise team.
Yeah, I mean, and Joe, right now, they have the most impressive non-conference win in the SEC this season. Beating Kansas State at home. I didn't think there was any way they would win this game. And Joe, it makes it even more exciting. I mean, Kansas State, obviously, they won the Big 12 last year. They were the only regular season loss for TCU. Kansas State had a lot of thoughts of maybe winning the Big 12 this year. Maybe they still can. The way they won the game with what appeared to be just straight up coaching malpractice by Eli Drinkowitz. I mean, you saw the whole last couple of minutes. There was delay games and false starts galore. And it seemed like both coaches just kind of lost control of their team and their offense coordinators. I don't know what they were doing. Maybe they were playing Tetris on their phone when they weren't paying attention. Missouri's driving. They have a 56-yard field goal. There's an inexplicable delay game. And I knew that Mevis was an amazing kicker because I remember last year when they played Auburn, there was all the stats thrown out about the thicker kicker and how he hadn't missed a kick in like 2 seasons, and he never missed a kick inside of 20 yards. And of course, he missed the one against Auburn. And so I was like, there he is going out for 61-yarder. And I told my wife, I was like, this dude can actually make this. I mean, he's got an amazing leg. But what made it even more insane is that it was in the pouring rain. I mean, there had been a decent amount of rain in that game. And that dude just drilled it. And it suddenly went from Eli Drinkowitz being a coach who didn't know how to manage a clock in the last few minutes of a game to blew a golden opportunity to one who has the most impressive win of the year in the SEC.
Yeah, I mean, how about that? Who would have expected that under the circumstances? And I think that the other footnote I would say is an observation is I feel like this year I've seen more kicks from a greater distance in college football than I feel like I've ever seen. Like, I feel like, you see it with more regular occurrence in the NFL, a lot of kicks, like from 60 yards or the high 50s, but I feel like I'm seeing it with much more regularity now in college.
Absolutely. I mean, this was, I'll give Drinkwitz this. He knew he had a player that could do that, and he gave him the opportunity to show it off. And that was just a highly impressive kick. I think it may have been good from 70 yards. I mean, it wasn't even close. And, I mean, the kicker now, I think he's got a chance to be bigger than Dicker, the kicker from Texas, in terms of, like, just his popularity. And how often do you get to see the kicker being probably the most recognizable player on the team? And I think right now, a lot of people pick out Mevis if he's walking around campus or walking out in public, but not many people could pick out Brady Cook or Luther Burden or any other Missouri player.
Yeah, that's true. You had a roster coming into the season, it'd be hard to, name a who's who of that roster.
Absolutely. But yeah, Missouri's undefeated right now with how bad everybody else except for Georgia is looking in the East. Maybe that's a team to watch out for. Joe, briefly on Georgia, they came out pretty flat against South Carolina. I thought South Carolina had a very good plan to begin the game. Spencer Rattler played excellent throughout, even with Georgia, unsurprisingly getting great pass rush on him. I do think that was an impressive victory for Georgia in the way they came out in the second half. And without scoring any touchdowns in the first half, they scored 3 touchdowns in the second half and give up no points. And I thought that was, Georgia needed a wake-up call, and they responded the way that a good team does when it gets punched in the mouth.
Yeah, I mean, they definitely did. South Carolina, like you alluded to, had a great game plan coming into it. And I think that, though, at the end of the day, though, I still have, long-term concerns more with Georgia. I still don't think their schedule, represents much of a challenge in the regular season, but I'm really going to be interested to see how they evolve as the season goes on, how much better their offense improves or regresses, because I think that's going to go a long way to see how they would fare in what, could be a potential shootout against, some of these other playoff teams that are going to have a high-flying quarterback.
Absolutely. I mean, I think Carson Beck so far, he had a lot of hype as a 5-star. Everybody's like, this guy's so much better than Stetson Bennett. He looks to be more of a game manager than Stetson Bennett has. And while he's not making any mistakes, he hasn't done anything spectacular. So I'm interested to see how he performs. He's giving me like a lot of an A.J. McCarron type vibe the first year that he was Alabama's starting quarterback, which A.J. made the plays when he mattered, and ultimately they won the national championship, and he got better each season he was there. But he was a little bit of a liability and not quite confident with himself that first season he was a starter for Bama.
Yeah, and you know what I mean? Like, there's going to be a game probably where Beck has to throw it like 40 times. And I want to know what that looks like. I want to see what that looks like.
I do too. And, the Georgia has got a little bit the same problem the Saints do. I mean, they're very thin at running back, which is crazy to say for Georgia, but they've had so many injuries. There's definitely going to be a game where Beck's going to be the one that's going to be responsible for them winning or losing.
Definitely.
All right, Joe, when we come back, we're going to talk about some wins and losses that are going to happen this weekend and what may be the greatest college football weekend in recent memory with, 5 ranked-on-ranked matchups, probably the best weekend for the remainder of this year. I'm really looking forward to talking about that and, of course, watching it. We're looking forward to more of y'all listening to the show and checking it out. You can follow us on Twitter at DJ Sports Show. And, of course, we're also on Instagram, the Dan and Joe Sports Show Instagram, and our Spotify. You can listen to all of our episodes there. You can search there and subscribe. And, of course, subscribe to our YouTube page, the Dan and Joe Sports Show YouTube page. And as always, I'm Dan.
And I'm Joe.